Imagine a blind little girl, no older than 10, walking onto a grand stage and sitting at a piano meant for the world's most famous musician. The audience gasps, and the pianist himself explodes in rage, shouting that she doesn't belong. But what happened next left the entire world speechless. This is the story of Amara. Who allowed her to touch my piano? The furious words cut through the hushed air of the grand concert hall like a blade of thunder. 1,000 eyes turned toward the stage, where the spotlight burned bright on a little girl, no older than 10. She looked so small sitting at the massive white grand piano, her legs barely reaching the edge of the velvet bench. She wore a simple navy blue dress, nothing fancy, nothing grand, but in the brilliance of the stage lights, it made her seem almost ethereal. Covering her eyes were dark sunglasses, hiding a truth the audience quickly realized: she was blind. Her hands, small and delicate, hovered nervously just above the ivory keys. She hadn't even played a note yet, but already the atmosphere of the room had shifted into something electric, something uneasy. And then, across from her, stood Victor Langston. Victor was a legend. The world's most famous pianist. His fiery performances had filled concert halls across Europe, Asia, and America. People described his hands as weapons of perfection, able to bend even the most complex pieces of music to his will. He was adored by audiences, praised by critics, and feared by rivals. But just as well known as his skill was his pride. And tonight, his pride had been pierced. His silver hair glistened under the chandelier, his tuxedo crisp, every inch of him embodying the grandeur of the evening. But his face burned red with rage as he pointed an accusing finger at the girl on the bench. "This is not a circus. Get this child off the stage," he shouted, his voice booming so loudly it echoed against the walls. The audience gasped as one. A wave of whispers swept through the hall. "Who is she? Did she sneak in? She's blind. What's she doing at the piano?" Murmurs rippled, some full of pity, others dripping with doubt. Yet none dared to interfere. No one in this glittering sea of gowns and tuxedos wanted to challenge Victor Langston, the master of the evening. But the girl did not move. She sat still, her little frame straightened with a quiet dignity. Her small fingers hovered just above the keys, trembling slightly, not from fear of Victor's anger, but from the storm building inside her chest. Her name was Amara. And though she was blind, she had seen more in her short years than most people in that room ever would. Amara had lived her life in darkness. But where the world had taken away her sight, it had given her a gift, an ear so finely tuned that every note, every vibration, every echo of sound painted pictures in her mind. She did not need to see music, she felt it. The grand piano before her was not a stranger. It was her oldest friend. She knew the smooth coolness of its keys, the subtle resistance beneath her fingers, the low rumble of its bass notes, and the pure silver of its high tones. Each sound was a language only she understood. But now, here she sat, mocked before a sea of strangers. Victor's voice rose again, dripping with disdain. "This stage is for musicians, not children who can't even read the notes. Remove her at once." The cruelty of his words struck the room like a hammer. Some of the audience flinched. A woman in the front row shook her head, her eyes full of pity. A man muttered, "She doesn't belong here." For a moment, Amara's courage faltered. Her hands hesitated. She could feel the heat of shame crawling up her neck. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. But then, something inside her shifted. She remembered her mother's words, "Baby, when you play, you don't just make music, you make people listen." So she stayed. She didn't argue with Victor. She didn't cry. She didn't rise from the bench. She simply sat there, her tiny hands hovering above the keys, waiting. And though the audience held its breath, though Victor seethed with fury, there was an undeniable sense in the room that something was about to happen. Something no one would ever forget. Amara had dreamed of this moment for as long as she could remember. Blind since birth, she never knew what colors looked like, never saw the shapes of the clouds, or the faces of the people who loved her. But she heard everything. She knew the sound of wind racing through tall trees, the laughter of children splashing in puddles, the creak of her mother's rocking chair late at night. And more than anything, she knew the piano. Her earliest memory wasn't of toys or games but of her mother guiding her tiny fingers across chipped ivory keys in their small apartment. The piano wasn't new. It wasn't glamorous. Some of the keys stuck, and the wood was worn from decades of use. But to Amara, it was magical. She didn't need sheet music. She didn't need sight. Every sound became a story in her mind. A high note was a bird soaring. A low chord was thunder rolling across a stormy sky. A melody was a journey, one she could take anywhere, anytime, no matter how small her world seemed. Her mother, who worked 2 jobs just to pay rent, would often pause by the doorway to listen. "Baby," she whispered once, tears in her eyes, "you don't just play. You speak through those keys." But outside their little home, not everyone believed in Amara's gift. Neighbors would shake their heads. "It's a nice hobby, but she'll never be a real pianist," they said. Teachers at school told her mother, "Music competitions are too demanding. Maybe encourage her to do something else, something more realistic." Even some relatives dismissed her. "She's blind. She can't possibly compete with children who can read music." Each word stung. Each doubt pressed against her like a wall trying to block her path. But Amara never stopped playing. When she was sad, she played. When she was lonely, she played. When she wanted to dream bigger than the 4 walls of her apartment, she played. The piano wasn't just an instrument, it was her escape, her freedom, her voice. So when her mother told her about the International Music Gala, the most prestigious event of the year, where the world's greatest musicians performed, Amara's heart leapt. "Victor Langston will be there," her mother said. Amara knew the name. Everyone did. He was the king of the piano, the man whose performances made headlines around the world. She had listened to his recordings countless times, her tiny hands tracing along the piano as if trying to copy his spirit. That's when Amara made a decision. "I want to play there," she whispered. Her mother froze, worry etching across her face. "Baby, that stage, it's not for people like us. It's for professionals, for those who've been trained since birth. They won't let you near that piano." But Amara shook her head. "They don't have to let me. I just need to try." Her mother didn't argue. Deep down, she knew her daughter's fire couldn't be put out. On the night of the gala, while the wealthy and powerful gathered in gowns and tuxedos, Amara found her way in. She wasn't on the guest list, and she didn't have an invitation. But guided by the sound of the music, the shuffle of people, and the echoes of the stage, she walked forward with quiet confidence. The white grand piano stood gleaming in the center of the stage, its polished surface reflecting the chandelier's glow. To most, it was just an instrument. But to Amara, it was a dream waiting to be touched. So she climbed onto the bench, straightened her dress, and rested her hands over the keys. For one moment, she believed the music would speak louder than her blindness, louder than the doubts, louder than the world's cruel whispers. And then Victor Langston appeared. The hall erupted in whispers. The master himself had entered. But instead of admiration, his first words were poison. His pride could not tolerate what he saw, a blind child sitting at his piano, in his spotlight. His voice rose, laced with cruelty, "This stage is not for children who cannot even see the notes." The words hit Amara like a stone. All the doubts she had fought for years came rushing back, the voices of neighbors, teachers, skeptics, all rolled into one. But even as her confidence trembled, her hands remained where they were. Because Amara knew, this was her moment. And no insult, no humiliation, no famous pianist's pride was going to silence her dream. The first note was barely a whisper. Amara's tiny finger pressed the key so gently that for a moment, some wondered if they had imagined it. But then came another note, soft, trembling, delicate, followed by another, and another. The hall, which had moments ago been buzzing with whispers and Victor's fury, fell utterly silent. Every ear strained, every heartbeat slowed, as the blind little girl began to play. At first, it was uncertain. Her hands, small against the vastness of the piano, wavered as though deciding if they belonged there at all. But then, something shifted. A quiet determination flickered across her face, and her fingers began to move with purpose. And the sound that filled the hall was unlike anything the audience had ever heard. It wasn't just music. It was emotion given form. The piano sang of loneliness, the kind a child feels when the world tells her she doesn't belong. Then it whispered of hope, fragile but unyielding, like the first light of dawn. It roared of struggle, deep and heavy, as if echoing the battles she had fought in silence. And then it soared, bright, free, triumphant, like a bird finally breaking free from its cage. Every note carried a story. Every chord carried her soul. The audience leaned forward in their seats, captivated. People who had come expecting polished performances from seasoned professionals now sat on the edge of their chairs, hanging on to the music of a child they had nearly dismissed. A woman in the front row, pearls glinting at her neck, pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. A man beside her, who only minutes ago had muttered that the girl didn't belong, now sat frozen, his jaw slack, unable to believe what he was hearing. Even the ushers at the back of the hall, usually indifferent to the performances, stood still, their eyes fixed on the stage. And then there was Victor Langston. The great pianist, the man of pride and power, had been ready to snatch the girl off stage, ready to reclaim his spotlight. But as Amara played, his hand fell slowly to his side. His face, once red with anger, softened with something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Humility. Amara's fingers moved faster now, darting across the keys with a precision that seemed impossible for someone so young. Each note rang out clear and strong, as though the piano itself had been waiting for her touch. It was as if the music was no longer just coming from her but through her, flowing like a river that could not be stopped. The hall vibrated with her story. Somewhere in the middle of the performance, the audience forgot she was blind. They forgot she was only 10. They forgot the insults Victor had thrown. All they could see, all they could hear, was greatness unfolding before them. By the time she reached the final movement, Amara was no longer trembling. Her whole body swayed with the rhythm, her face tilted upward, her expression calm, almost serene. She was lost in the music, lost in the freedom of expression no one could take from her. And then, with a final flourish, she struck the last chord. The sound rang through the hall like a bell, pure, strong, and unshakable. It hung in the air, refusing to fade, echoing in every heart that heard it. For a moment, there was silence. A silence so profound it felt sacred. Then, suddenly, the hall erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor as people leapt to their feet. Applause thundered like a storm. Cheers filled the air. Some clapped furiously, others shouted her name, many simply wept, overwhelmed by emotions they didn't know how to describe. The blind girl, mocked only moments before, had stunned the world. And she hadn't spoken a single word. Her music had spoken for her. The applause shook the hall. It wasn't the polite kind of clapping reserved for child performers or novelty acts. No, this was thunderous, raw, unstoppable. People shouted, whistled, and cheered as if their very souls had been set free by the music. Some of the audience members stood on their chairs, clapping above their heads. Others wept openly, tears streaming down their faces. A woman in the front row clutched her chest and whispered, "I'll never forget this night." Cameras flashed as reporters scrambled to capture every second. Social media feeds lit up, as snippets of the performance, secretly recorded on phones, spread like wildfire. In the middle of it all sat Amara. Her small hands rested quietly in her lap now, her sunglasses still hiding her eyes. She looked calm, almost unaware of the chaos she had just unleashed. She couldn't see the crowd's reaction, but she could hear it. The roaring applause filled her ears, and deep inside, she felt it, the sound of validation, the sound of her dream being recognized. But the most shocking silence came from Victor Langston. The great pianist, whose name commanded respect in every corner of the world, stood frozen only a few feet from the child. His chest rose and fell heavily. His hands, usually so confident, trembled at his sides. For the first time in his career, he was not the center of attention. For the first time, the spotlight had shifted, and it had shifted onto a blind little girl. The audience began to notice him. All eyes turned from Amara to Victor, waiting, watching. What would he do? Would he storm off the stage, furious at being upstaged? Would he demand the applause stop? Instead, something no one expected happened. Victor took a slow step forward. Then another. His polished shoes echoed across the wooden stage as he approached the child. The clapping softened, curiosity replacing noise. The crowd leaned forward, holding their breath. Victor stopped beside Amara. For a moment, he just looked at her. Though she couldn't see him, she felt the weight of his presence. Then, in a voice that trembled with something foreign to him, humility, he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice echoing through the hushed hall. "Tonight, I was not the greatest pianist on this stage." He turned, gesturing toward Amara, his hand trembling. "She was." Gasps rippled through the crowd. And then, another explosion of applause erupted, louder, fiercer than before. People shouted Amara's name. Some cried harder. The hall had transformed into a storm of joy and disbelief. Victor, the man once filled with pride, bowed his head slightly toward the girl. For the first time in his life, he acknowledged not a rival, but a teacher. And Amara? She smiled softly, her head tilted as if listening to the sound of her victory. The world had stood still, and in that stillness, history had been made. That night did not just end with applause. It began a movement. Within hours, Amara's performance spread beyond the walls of the grand concert hall. Audience members had captured the moment on their phones, and the videos went viral across the world. Headlines exploded online. Blind girl leaves famous pianist speechless. 10-year-old prodigy stuns international gala. Music has no limits, Amara's story inspires millions. In every corner of the globe, people watched her sit at that shining white piano, watched Victor Langston's pride collapse, and listened to a song that no one could forget. Suddenly, Amara wasn't just a little girl in a navy blue dress, she was a symbol of courage, determination, and raw talent. Television stations requested interviews. Music schools begged her mother to let Amara join, offering scholarships and training. Invitations from around the world poured in: Paris, London, New York, Tokyo. Everyone wanted to hear the blind prodigy who had turned the world silent, then thunderous. But more than the fame, it was the inspiration that mattered. Children who had been told their dreams were impossible now pointed to Amara and said, "If she can, maybe I can too." Parents who once doubted their children's abilities now whispered her name as hope. She became more than a musician, she became a story, a living reminder that obstacles could be turned into strengths. And what of Victor Langston? The man who had once mocked her became one of her loudest supporters. He introduced her at future concerts, standing proudly by her side. In interviews, he admitted, "I thought I was teaching the world music. That night, Amara taught me something greater, humility." The press was shocked, fans were amazed, but for Amara, it was simple. She had never wanted to humiliate Victor or to steal the spotlight. She only wanted to play. She only wanted the world to hear her heart through the piano. Years passed, and Amara grew. Her music matured, her skill sharpened, but she never lost the purity that had captured the world that night. She performed in sold-out halls, composed original pieces, and even taught children with disabilities to find their voice through music. One day, a journalist asked her, "Amara, how did you do it? How did you stand up to the greatest pianist alive, blind and only 10 years old, and not crumble?" Amara smiled softly, tilting her head in that familiar way, as though listening to a song only she could hear. "I don't need eyes to see the beauty of music," she said. "I only need a heart willing to feel it." And with that simple truth, the world understood, greatness isn't about what you can see, or even what you can prove. It's about what you can make others feel. And Amara, the blind girl once mocked by a legend, had made the whole world feel something unforgettable. Her legacy had begun. And that night, the blind girl who was mocked became the musician who moved the world. Amara's story reminds us that greatness isn't about what you see, it's about what you make others feel. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.